So, do you think that Americans understand what climate change is and understand enough about it to maybe counteract it or involve themselves in activism about it?
In general, I think no, unfortunately. I think that people have a general sense because they hear what they hear in the media. But just like any other topic, I think that people tend to self-select and they either read the stuff about it that's true, which is the scientifically backed stuff about it, or they read the stuff that says it's not really happening or it's not caused by people. And they come up with all these other explanations for why, it might be happening. Or they say, well, it's not really happening because there's a lot of snow falling in the Northeast this year, so we can't have global warming. And unfortunately, I also think that people have these misconceptions about what global warming is or how the greenhouse effects works. As you've learned in class, people say, this idea of trapping heat from the sun, which is not what's actually happening. So I think if more people really understood the science, the fact that this is what greenhouse gases actually do and that it's a physical process, that, there's no way to change that, this is just what they do, maybe people would have a better understanding. The more CO2 you put in the atmosphere, the more it's going to do this greenhouse effect. But I just don't think people get it, and it's very convenient to just say, well, it's probably not real because then I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Do you think that the government should be doing more to inform people about this?
Oh, yeah. I do, and I think that's part of the problem is that for some reason people don't necessarily seem to trust scientists, or they don't understand scientists, or scientists aren't always very good at expressing what's happening in a way that people can understand. They come off maybe a little arrogant or a little snooty, and so people don't want to listen to them. And so who do they listen to? They listen to celebrities, they listen to their government, they listen to, So if we had in this country at least a consensus among people in power and among people who have a platform that, yes, the scientists say this is real, we have to trust them because they know what they're talking about, then maybe people would start to go, oh, maybe this is something we should actually pay attention to. And so we've seen it happen in the past with the Montreal Protocol, which was put in place in the early 90s because the ozone hole was growing. We were having effects from that. And the government went, oh, this is a problem. Let's try to do something about it. And it worked. So now today we've seen, right, CFCs have dropped and the ozone hole is getting smaller. And all of these great things are happening because the government took charge and did something about it. And unfortunately, we really need to see that happen again if any progress is going to be made.
Yeah. So for that, the Clean Air Initiative, with Trump's administration right now, do you think that we're going in the wrong direction?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that maybe we can bounce back after Trump, or if we
I hope so.
4 years?
I hope so. I mean, I know there are some, I don't know all the details of politics and how it works. I know there are some rules that, certain things that presidents come in and they get rid of them, like certain policies Obama had put into place that Trump then got rid of, and we can't go back. But the truth is that with climate change, we're in a place right now where the administration doesn't seem to care very much about reducing emissions, about working with other countries, about giving credits for not emitting carbon, all these kinds of things. My hope is that we'll be in a new administration in a couple of years, and that at that point, maybe we start to go back towards taking the correct steps so that we're not contributing as much to the greenhouse effect, as much greenhouse gas to the atmosphere, but also working on ways to start using renewables and also to give people credit for doing things that actually help, because that's where I think it gets difficult too, is it's all well and good to tell people you need to do A, B, and C to help the environment. A, B, and C sometimes are expensive, sometimes they're inconvenient, sometimes they make your life more difficult, and so how do we give people incentives to actually do those things that make an impact on their life?
That's a perfect segue, actually, to the next question I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So you said, like you just said, a lot of things are really expensive,
Yes.
especially with climate change and, cutting the emissions and everything that they can get pricey. So for the everyday person, what is one or two ways that, the everyday person can cut back on their emissions, cut back on adding to climate change, cut back on the footprint that we are leaving today? Do you have any tips for anyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to say, here are some things you can do. And I mean, I can list them, right? So you don't leave the water running when that's not directly related to emissions, but it's related to water use, which is also related to climate change. You can say, drive a hybrid car, don't eat as much meat, all these things. And it's true, the meat industry is one of the biggest polluters in terms of greenhouse gas. So all of that's great. If people want to do those things and are able to do those things, ride your bike instead of drive your car, all that stuff is great. But I think that the best thing that people can do, hands down, the best thing people can do is be ambassadors for change, meaning to really get to know the science, try and understand yourself so that you know why we say it's real and that it is real, and trust the scientists. When scientists are saying this is real, and almost every scientist out there is saying it's real, you have to pay attention to that, right? And so for us, if we can be the ambassadors for change, if we can tell our neighbors and our friends and our families this is real and we need to care about it, then change will start to happen, because you'll have a collective of people who want to do something, as opposed to one individual person saying, well, I'm not going to use plastic bags. That's great. I mean, don't get me wrong, but you can't get every single person to make all of those changes that need to happen. So the way to do it, I think, is through a movement, meaning that everybody gets on board, becomes ambassadors for change. So like in my class, I try, to get it through to 200 people at a time, that this is real and it's something we should care about. Maybe those 200 people go home and they tell their family, I learned what the greenhouse effect is and it's real. And it happens. Yeah. So maybe we should care about this, and maybe they spread it to another 200 people. I really feel like that's when change happens, is when large groups of people start to get on board.
Exactly. I would agree.
Yeah.
I have maybe like one or two more questions.
Of course.
So I saw this, I guess it's called like a meme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, my kids are into the memes.
And it was of like a newspaper article, like a cartoon. And it was about climate change. And they had this, it was a pot of boiling water and there was frogs in there.
Yeah. 2
of them were scientists, 2 of them were just regular people.
A denier or a regular person. Yeah.
So the first person said, we're boiling to death in here.
Yeah.
And the second person said, they're increasing the temperature in here till we die.
Yeah.
So the same thing, but different wording.
Yeah.
And then the third one said, look, they have no consensus.
Right.
So what do you say to those people who, the scientists are saying exactly the same thing, just a couple different words, but that's throwing people off.
Right.
And off-putting them to make them think that this maybe not be a real cause or not a real thing that they should be involved in.
Yeah, it's a distractor.
What exactly?
Yeah.
What's your advice to like stop that? To like, if someone's saying, that's not happening, what would you kind of say to them to be like, no, actually this is happening? Like, is there anything that you would say to like?
Yeah, that's a hard question. It's so funny you bring that up, because I actually showed that cartoon in class.
Did you really?
On probably the day you missed.
My gosh.
Yeah, I had it up on the screen. It was the 2 frogs and then the deniers.
Oh my gosh,
no consensus,
that's awesome.
Right? And so I think this is all noise. It's just a way for deniers. It's a convenient way for deniers to say this can't be true because there's no consensus, which is ridiculous, like you say, because you're saying exactly the same thing. If I say, scientists talk about that ocean temperature is increasing by whatever amount, and then another scientist says, well, the atmosphere is increasing by, you could say, well, those are 2 different things, but they're not, because they're all part of the same Earth system, right? So one way to combat that is to talk about Earth as a system and say, well, it doesn't matter whether we talk about temperature going up 1.5 degrees in the oceans or 2 degrees on land or 1 degree in the atmosphere. All of that is the same thing. It's all part of global warming, which is part of climate change. The bottom line is that people who use those arguments are not going to believe you no matter what you say. It's very difficult to change people's minds who are that entrenched in finding ways around it. You could also try using an example that hits close to home. You might ask the person, well, what is something that you care about? What is a problem or something that you're really concerned about? And they might say, I hesitate here to get too political, but they might say, abortion is something that matters to me too. Okay, so is pro-life and anti-abortion the same thing? Right?
Yeah, there you go.
It's the same thing. We're using different words to describe them. So, if someone says, well, there's really no consensus on whether you're saving a life, if you're anti-abortion or if you're pro-life, it is a consensus. It's the same thing. So but it's difficult. It's really hard. One thing I learned, I took a workshop last year about communicating science to the public. And one of the interesting things that the research shows is that people are really closed off to hearing opposing ideas and thoughts if you come at it from a place of, I'm right and you're wrong. I know the science and you don't. How you get people to start having a conversation is by coming at it from a place of what matters to you. Why is this important to you? Why isn't it important to you? And you find common ground. And so an example that a lot of people use is the vaccine issue, where there's, anti-vaxxers versus people pro-vaccine. The scientists and the doctors know where they come down on this. It is clear as day what is real and what's not real, right? And yet you cannot go up to a parent and say, if you don't vaccinate your child, you don't care about them. I'm right and you're wrong. The science says, because now they've completely shut you out. So where you come from is, what are your concerns about a parent for your child? Why are you worried about giving them vaccines? And you start a conversation. I'm a parent, right? I'm pro-vaccine, but I'm a parent.
Yeah.
So if someone says to me, I'm terrified that my child is going to end up with autism, or we can have a discussion about that, about the fear of being a parent and what might happen to your kid. Now you've got them in your corner. And I think the same thing could happen with climate change if you start a conversation with deniers about, well, what are the issues that matter to you? It might be the economy. It might be jobs. It might be, there's fertile ground there to have discussions about the future. We're going to be left behind if we don't think about going to renewables, if we don't think about cutting our emissions. All these other developing countries and developed nations are going to surpass us. We're going to end up not being the superpower that we think we are. So we got to get on board. I think there's fertile ground there for discussions and common ground.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then, just going off what you just said, which country do you think that the United States should really look to? Because I know Spain uses a lot of solar energy, a lot, the wind, the rain stays mainly in the plains and all that stuff. I know France has started an initiative, the Paris Agreement and everything like that. Which country would you say that we should exemplify?
Well, it's funny because I think there's so many. I mean, it's hard because we don't want to have to look to other countries. We want to be the leaders. So I think that we have to take what other countries are doing as a signal to us that if we don't, we will get left behind. And I think you could look at Brazil and the way they use hydroelectric, because that's their resource, right? Like you said, you look at Spain, they use solar, that's their resource. So we have to look at our country, which is so big, and we have so many resources. Okay, so in this part of the world or the country, we're going to use solar. Here it might be hydroelectric. Here it might be nuclear. I think we have to, even China, which is our biggest competitor economically and one of the biggest polluters, by the way, they're more advanced in the way that they're looking to cut emissions than we are. That's pretty telling.
Yeah.
When you think about just within the last 10 to 15 years, they were kind of third world.
Yeah.
And now they're surpassing us in terms of their commitment to cutting emissions versus our commitment.
Yeah.
And they have, over 1 billion people, and they're still more committed than we are. That should tell you something. And I think when people talk about economics and jobs and all these things that they worry about, China's a good place to look because they're our biggest competitor in terms of the world market, right? So if they're taking it seriously, they're putting a bunch of money into research, they're putting money into science, they're putting money into climate change. Why aren't we doing the same? We're going to end up watching them advance, and we're going to be left behind. So I think we can look all over the world and see examples that we need to, get on board.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
That's all my questions.
Really? Well, that was easy.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.